Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making raspberry frosting. Hey Sugar Spun bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. Today we're making a simple, from-scratch raspberry frosting. It is a beautiful pink color and it has a fresh raspberry taste. We will not be using any artificial flavorings, no artificial colors. It's just a beautiful naturally. So let's go ahead and get started. Today's recipe will start over on the stovetop where you're going to need a small saucepan. The first thing we're going to add is 1 cup of raspberries. I am using fresh raspberries today. I think they give the best flavor and are the easiest to work with, but frozen raspberries could be substituted. And we are also going to be adding 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. And I also like to add a tablespoon of lemon juice. This helps amplify the tartness of the raspberries, makes the frosting have a really nice bright flavor, and a little bit of liquid is going to help make it easier to cook down the raspberries without burning them. Now we'll turn our stovetop heat to medium, and we are going to stir these raspberries very frequently while they cook. You don't want to walk away because they could end up burning, which obviously would not be ideal. Now, as we're cooking our raspberries, you are going to notice at some point things start to get really red and juicy. This is because the raspberries start to release their juices as they cook, which is exactly what we want. That's what we need for a raspberry frosting. Now, once this happens, just continue to stir. And I'm also going to start mashing the raspberries with my spatula a little bit. They should break down very easily at this point. Now, I am going to turn the heat down just a notch, about medium low, because I don't want the water to evaporate too quickly. Things get a little dangerous. Things get a little dangerous and we could end up scorching our raspberries or cooking out too much of the water. So turning down the heat just a notch, I'm reducing it to a more gentle simmer, and I am going to just stir constantly. And what I'm looking for is the raspberry sauce to start to thicken. I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. Now, I don't want to turn this into something as thick as a jelly or a jam. I still want it to be a little bit loose. That way it incorporates nicely into my frosting. So what I'm looking for is I want to be able to make a trail with my spatula, and I want the trail to hold its shape for a second or so before the raspberry juices fold back in and close that back up. So as you can see, there's a little bit of hesitation for the raspberries close that gap, but it wasn't quite long enough. I want to go a little bit further. I want a little bit more thickening. Exactly how long this takes on your stovetop is just going to vary depending on different factors that are going on in your own kitchen. But for me, I find this takes about 4 or 5 minutes, I'd say, once the berries have released their juices. Okay, so I'm starting to be able to see the stainless steel on the bottom of my pan. The trail that I make with my spatula, it holds for a second before it closes back in, and you can see that gap still hasn't closed a couple seconds later. So I want to immediately remove this from the heat. All right, and now I have a heat-proof bowl. It's just a glass bowl, and I have a fine mesh strainer. Just set the strainer over the bowl, and I'm going to pour this right through the strainer. Now, the reason that we are doing this is because we want to remove all of those raspberry seeds. Now, if you want some of that texture, you can certainly stir like a tablespoon of these back into your frosting, but I would not use all of the seeds because it's just going to kind of mess with the texture, and adding the extra liquid attached to those seeds could end up breaking your buttercream, so I wouldn't do too much. Now, I will use my spatula to work those juices through. And when all is said and done, you should end with between 3 and 4 tablespoons of raspberry juice. And it may take some encouragement to get that through if your strainer is particularly fine, like mine is. Just trying to work through absolutely as much of that juice as I possibly can. Now, another point I want to mention about the seeds is if you want to pipe this frosting, the seeds can clog in the piping tip and kind of make things a little bit difficult for you. So if you're going to be using a closed star tip, I would avoid adding them to your frosting. Now, the jam likes to stick underneath this strainer, so I'm going to scrape that off. All right, and at this point, our raspberry sauce, or whatever you want to call it, it's not quite a jam. It's still much too loose to use, and it is much too warm to use. We would just melt our buttercream if we tried to use it now. So I am just going to set this aside, and I want to let it come completely to room temperature before I go any further with this recipe. Okay, it's been about 20 or 30 minutes. My raspberry filling, or whatever you want to call this, has cooled completely. It does not feel even a little bit warm to the touch. So now I'm comfortable proceeding with making the frosting. This is essentially a raspberry buttercream frosting, so of course we're going to start with some butter. You'll need 1 cup of unsalted butter, and you want this to be softened. You don't want it super melty or oily, but you want it to be approaching room temperature. I'm also going to be adding just a pinch of salt for flavor. It helps keep the frosting from being too sweet. Now before I add anything else, I'm going to cream this butter until it's nice and smooth. And if you don't have unsalted butter on hand, you could just use salted butter and omit the salt. All right, once my butter is smooth and creamy, I'm going to start adding my powdered sugar. I have 3 cups of powdered sugar here, and I am going to gradually add this because I want the butter to absorb it nicely so that the frosting is nice and smooth, and I don't want my powdered sugar to go all over my kitchen, which usually ends up happening to me even when I try to be careful, but we're going to try to set ourselves up for success. Now you'll notice with this recipe, we will not be adding any vanilla extract. That's because I found it really bullies the flavor from the raspberry. It takes away from that. So just straight raspberry flavoring today and a little bit of salt and sugar and butter, but no vanilla. And a little bit more. Add our last bit of sugar. I just want to stir this until all of the sugar is absorbed. Don't want to see any powder remaining, except maybe a little bit up the sides, but nothing on the bottom. Okay, now we get to start adding our raspberry sauce. Now I don't like to add this all at once. I feel a little bit safer if I add it a little bit at a time. That way I'm less likely to break my buttercream, which can happen if you add too much liquid. So I'm gonna add about half of this. And as I said, you should have about 3.5 tablespoons of raspberry sauce if you want to measure yours and make sure you have cooked it down appropriately. So add a little bit and stir this in. Look at that, it's already taking on such a pretty pink color. And I'll add a little bit more. I usually do this in 3 parts. And now I will add the last of my raspberry sauce. Now, if your raspberry sauce wasn't cooked down appropriately and was too liquidy, you could run into the issue of breaking your buttercream. You will know that's happened if it starts to look curdled and separated. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. We have a beautiful pink color. I'm just going to scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl because I want to make sure everything is well incorporated. And once we do this, our frosting is ready to use. And it's so beautiful, and that is all natural coloring. I actually really love using this frosting in my French macarons and in my chocolate macarons. It's a great filling for those. All right, you could certainly spread this frosting on a cake, but I'm going to pipe it today because I want you to see how beautifully it pipes. I'll be using an Attico 846 tip today, one of my favorite tips, slightly smaller than my often used 848. And I will just drop this right in my piping bag. Now, if for any reason your frosting happened to come out very thick, you can fix this by adding a splash of cream or milk to it to help thin it a little bit. Or if it came out too thin, not broken, but just too thin, just add a little bit more powdered sugar and that should help you. I really love everything about the frosting, the color, the consistency, the taste. I'm really excited for you to try this one. Now for today, I have prepared some dark chocolate cupcakes, and we'll go ahead and pipe this frosting on them. Oh my gosh, the dark chocolate and raspberry, I don't know if there's a better pairing. Now for this frosting, I like to do pretty little rosettes, which this piping tip is great for. And just drag the frosting around just like that. I'll tell you, getting some nice large piping tips was a game changer for me when it comes to decorating cupcakes. I used to just spread it on, it would be so messy. So I'll do a couple of these rosettes. But I also want you to see how it pipes nicely if you want to do a big frosting swirl on top of your cupcakes. Look at that, you could top that with a fresh raspberry. That would be beautiful. I'll do another one. All right, and that is how you make raspberry buttercream from scratch. I really hope you guys enjoy today's recipe, and if you try this one out, please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. It's really good. I can't help it, I don't know what to do. I'm nervous. Made a bit of a mess. It's delicious. It's the Italian in me. See? I got too ambitious. Had to make sure it was perfect, and it is.